really excited today to have this conversation, and really cool to see so many founders and DevRels and really a mix of other commercial and engineering teams in the audience. I'll ask everyone if you can just share a little bit about who you are, what you're working on, and then in the interest of context, share a little bit about what DevRel means for your context. And that would be really helpful as we go through the rest of the conversation. So Jessica, how about you kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So hello, everybody. My name is Jessica West. I am the head of developer relations at LaunchDarkly. It's a feature management platform. And currently what I'm working on is just, well, a lot of work because we're home. And so we work and repeat, and then going outside and hang with my dog. But beyond that, getting into developer relations, when you think about developer relations generally, it's really, if you look at the title, it's relating to developers. So in DevRel, we're always we're looking for people that are developers that know how to proactively speak with other developers and helping devs better understand our product and keeping that feedback loop open. So allowing developers to say like, hey, here's how I'm thinking about a product. Can you, what do you think about this? And for us to then, as an advocate, to go advocate for them to our company and bring that feedback loop and then come back and say, here's why this is a great solution for you, and here we solve this, or let us help you find it a different way. Things that we work on is kind of a number of ways. We partner with our integrations team very heavily and helping with those partnerships and making sure those collaborations work really nicely. And then activities ranging from creating demos to webinars and helping with docs. And then the thing that a lot of us have seen for developer relations is assisting with events, speaking, and the lovely booth duties. So yeah, it's a little bit of everything, kind of from the code, content, and community perspective.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Jana, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jana. I lead experiential marketing at HashiCorp. I've been doing developer relations, community building, events, in-person events until March for a decade now. And I'm currently at HashiCorp, been here for the last 5 years. We build infrastructure tools. So we have really big open source community, and we also have enterprise version of our tools. And right now I'm in Mendocino on a vacation. We just finished a big event 2 weeks ago. And I think Jessica explained DevRel pretty well. I mean, that's how we approach it. What's really cool at HashiCorp, we actually have a whole org that is dedicated to developer relations. And under that is my team, right? We do the experiential marketing for our practitioner audience. We have the community team with the developer advocates, and then we have education, because really developer relations is all about content, education, and just helping our users learn how to use our products.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much for dialing in from your vacation. I can't imagine a more relaxing thing to do on vacation than hang out with us. So.
I'm not upset.
Derric, how about you?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Derric, and I'm the CEO of Mosaf. For an API analytics platform. We really help companies treat their APIs and products in themselves, everything from guiding customers to getting that usage data. For us, in terms of DevRel, we really see two big pieces. One is education. I think that's really important in terms of helping our developers, whether it's around content, to webinars, to speaking at conferences. The other big piece is authenticity. And the reason why I believe in this so much is because we're not tied to other goals such as sales, which is commission-based. DevRel is really there just to be that liaison between the community versus the engineering and product teams.
Lots of juicy stuff here. Can't wait to unpack. And my name is Patrick. I am a co-founder and CEO of Orbit. Orbit is a community experience platform that's focused heavily on developer communities. So happy to be talking with the crew today as Orbit sits at the intersection of DevRel and community and lots of other exciting things. So I guess to kick us off, I think let's start broad. And in light of the changes over the past few months, how has the practice of DevRel changed given the context that you shared about your company? What's different now?
Where do we even start? Or who wants to start? I mean, maybe I'll start. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? DevRel, you have a collection of a bunch of different activities, whether they're online, your learn platforms, forums, to in person, whether it's like speaking at conferences, booth, organizing meetups, things like that. And just now, like, everything shifted, right? In February and March, we had to kind of redo all of our DevRel plans. and shift everything to be online, right? And we have to really think about how do you make these online experiences engaging, interesting, and because we still have our goals to hit. So fun challenge.
For us, for things changing, so the events was just for our team, it's just a portion. As a smaller team, we don't have the full resources that Hashi does. So we have each advocate focusing on a little bit of what like their focus areas was. So we just had a portion that was the in-person events shifted, obviously. And it was actually, it wasn't, everything was very jarring at the very beginning of the pandemic, but as far as, transitioning to more of the virtual events, it was a nice opportunity for us to go to attend those and actually helped some of our advocates that aren't able to travel as much participate and be engaged in those type of events and send proposals, because they could actually go speak at that event because it was online versus in person. So we saw a mix of some people that were down, like obviously did a downturn for the first month or so when everything first started. And then we saw an uptick of people that were actually able to go submit a talk and speak at an event that couldn't travel before. So it was a percentage change, but it wasn't a big strategy change. So.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the educational piece is always there when it comes to DevRel, but the way that you talk about that stuff before, you have to mobilize an entire team, everyone from sales to marketing to anyone else that needs to do event planning for a large event like that. Now we're focused on micro events where it might be just 1 or 2 people and that's it, that is planning their event independently, and get to actually create more of a relationship with those folks that are on that webinar or that podcast or whatnot.
Yeah, great points. So thinking about the education piece, it seems like previously for a lot of companies, the in-person workshop was a big part of the educational effort. Has that changed? The ability to create meaningful connection and educate people in an online setting? How is that different now than it was in a very in-person world?
We've, even before the pandemic hit, we're really building out our Learn platform, because the in-person trainings, they don't scale, right? We would have training day at our conferences or workshops, but you could have max 25 to 30 students, and we only have so many trainers versus building out a Learn platform that thousands of people can go through the different modules. So a hybrid is great.
Yeah, I was gonna say, echoing what Jana said, for us, the education piece, we didn't really use events as an education point. We had a workshop that the developer relations team was, in charge of for our big event, but that was just, one event through the whole year. So for us, our education is a lot more with online content through tutorials, demos, and written content. It scales much better and it lives a lot better over time. So we're trying to focus in on saying, hey, this is the piece of content that we're going to write, so that you can see, you'll see like that lives better over time for, whether that be a blog, technical documentation, or tutorial. So our team actually was working on a type of work called Guides, which is like our learning platform. And we're working on that in Q1 and we launched that in Q2, which is really exciting because that's one of those first pieces that we're working and engaging and helping our community learn and engage. And that's, through, best practice of like how you use feature flags in general, and then tutorials. So it's a blend, that one within our documentation side.
Yeah, and when it comes to these educational pieces, if you think about an event, you usually only have maybe a couple talks that you're able to do. So it might be a little bit higher level, a little bit broad. When you start creating stuff that's asynchronous, someone that can take a look at your piece of content offline on their own time, or you can actually be really targeted. You can have like a whole story behind this piece of content, and then this piece of content can feed into the next piece of content and create that whole a story behind it, which is a little bit different than what we've seen from in-person events.
Yeah, I'd say if I could add on to that, which brings up a really good point. For this kind of like building that story, having written content and having the demos, that increases our scope to talk with a lot more people, right? The diversity aspect. So it's, someone that wouldn't have a chance to go to an event, or even from a language perspective, they can translate that. May not be the best, but they can run it through Google Translate, or if your company has the ability to put those in different languages, that's a lot easier to digest and from an education point, and having people understand it and go through different series of data on their own time and at their own pace, rather than being in a workshop and trying to catch up with the instructor, feeling maybe behind because they got stuck in some debugging area, or maybe their computer wasn't set up, and they could be like a really like high anxious point. And so having content in a in-person type, like an event, makes it a lot more digestible and I think a little more accessible.
And just not wider in terms of audience, now you're targeting a global audience, but also different socioeconomic backgrounds, right? Some of these events are pretty expensive. You know, if you go to AWS, you have to fly there, you know, attend, the tickets themselves are not cheap. And now you're able to reach an audience that, you know, could be really anywhere in the world and has an interest in learning your technology or trying something new.
Yeah, I love that point. I mean, so we converted our in-person event, our European event, and we were expecting about 1,000 people. And yet we had 8,500 people register from 105 different countries. So all of a sudden, right, when you take this in-person, that is in-person event that is really expensive to organize, right? And you're flying your employees out, you're flying speakers out to this like digital event, and it just becomes accessible to more people around the world. It's a beautiful thing to discover.
Yeah, and not to mention the people that are working full-time jobs during the day, and then, you know, that are learning things at night. And so that really goes back to that education piece, which I think is so core to developer relations, and making sure that you're not focusing on like relying on your event exclusively for that portion.
I actually think after this, I mean, again, it's so unfortunate what's happening in the world, but this shift, right, to really how do you build these digital experiences, improve your digital experiences, whether it's like across your learn, education, forum, whatever you do. It's been such a great shift, right? I think we will always have, at least for our conferences, always have like a really built out digital component. Because yeah, I mean, so many things from like the content we produced. We had about 23 sessions, and we had sent everyone speaker kits, and now we have these really highly produced videos, right, of our customers speaking, of our ambassadors speaking, and that like extends, it's on our YouTube, it's on our resource page, and that just extends the reach of the conference so much farther.
So I'm interested, it seems like the ability to scale educational content and training materials is sort of unparalleled online versus offline. What does that mean for the community aspect of DevRel? If you think about sort of code, content, community as kind of some of the three big buckets that DevRel folks think about, you know, asynchronous education is super effective, but are we losing anything in terms of community by a shift to purely online?
I can take that one if you don't mind kicking that off. I think for community, it's something that we have to make sure that we distinguish. Like community is not like the same as in person. Like things like we have community that's online, and through that, like if you think about, you know, what 10, 15 years ago, like when we had the, you know, no more than 10, 15 years ago, I'm getting old. Long time ago, when the internet first came out, you know, we had the IRC, like those chat like rooms that people were coming in there and talking and find their community. Someone brought up like Napster as a good example. Like there was a channel, there's a whole community that was created around sharing music because they couldn't afford to do the CDs, and granted it was illegal and all those things, but the community was aspect there. And so that was through more things than just events. And so I think it's really important to not convolute those. And you've got great tools like Discourse that you can have in your own like community and sharing information and answering those questions. That makes it really safe within your community, or Discord for, you know, an alternative to Slack. And so I think that there's so many portions of the community. So with these events that are that we're seeing in a virtual manner, it's part of your community, but it's not the whole part of the community. So making sure that I think that those things aren't necessarily suffering, they're just changing.
Yeah, so it's like we've of course been building online communities since the 70s, right? There's been different versions of it, which looks different now, but there's an aspect of community, right? Those in-person connections that I do think are missing, and we haven't. And it's hard, right? It's hard. Like I wish we were all sitting in a room together, right, with the attendees. Like there's those connections. So I do believe at some person, like people will want, like at some point people will want in person to come back. And I haven't quite figured out how to like really get those like connections like in a digital way that you get like in person.
Besides the Zoom happy hours.
Right, people are exhausted. I mean, so for us, like we built a custom platform for our digital conference, and so we tried to build in community engagements that way. So it's chat, right? people being able to chat, ask questions. We had this like meetup function that you can suggest to host a meetup, right? We kind of thought of that as like hanging out at the Hashi Cafe, at the cafe, like at our like coffee shop at our conferences, so people could suggest a meetup and then people would join. But again, I mean, it's tough to replicate like that connection you have in person.
Yeah, I think we're not going to be able to replace that because we are humans. We create that connection, but until we have that one, like in a safer manner, it's just changing. But I think that we'll have that balance once we come back into whatever normal looks like, or whatever kind of cadence, like what a post-pandemic world looks like, and where we are. That's where we'll see. I think we'll be appreciating those in-person, like those events and like that contact even more so. But it'll go back to, I think Derric had mentioned earlier, kind of doing more like micro events versus these big, large scale ones. I think we'll see that not only virtually, but also in person as well, because it's just more of a safety point. And so if you think about some of these big events that we've all attended, and I think about being squished, like, and just being moved down the hallway for an hour, trying to get from one point to the Venetian and the other, sorry, reinvent. That's a lot. And like the thought of that is like a kind of a point of anxiety. So I think that we'll see these events really kind of come back to like what we've put for like the community and coming together, that local part, and making sure that you have a really authentic connection.
And personally, I don't know about you, but I don't want to attend like AWS reInvent. Does anyone actually want to attend it, right? For me, I'm like, I don't want my team and I to have to organize a 10,000 person conference with a massive expo hall. I also think they're just like wasteful, right? I mean, all the signage is thrown out, like all the carpet we cut. So it's like, yeah, I'm excited. And I think this is like such a beautiful time for us to like reset and just do things like better, right? And figure out what like these new ways of doing things are. But yeah, I don't want to go back to 10,000 person conferences.
So it's an interesting point. I think let's shift gears a little bit to some of the nuts and bolts. We've got a lot of founders, we've got a lot of DevRels wondering, what do I do? How do I do it? So maybe let's start with, I think two related questions. Let's start with, what are you measuring now? Has that changed since, in the past quarter or two? What are the top 2 or 3 things that are really important that you're reporting out on, that you're, winning budget for? And then we can go into the nuts and bolts of some of the tactics that you're using to make those OKRs and objectives come to life. So that makes sense?
It's funny, I just gave a talk on this yesterday about measuring advocacy. And so I feel like it's very top of mind. Like what I mentioned earlier, because events was just a portion of it, we haven't changed the way we're measuring those. And that's, we're measuring things from the OKR perspective. We're looking at all the different activities. So like we're looking at how the content's performing for those unique visitors coming in with our specific content that we're writing and putting out there. What's the funnel for them from the behavior of like, do they go from the guide to like a sign up page? Do they go from a guide, do they leave? How long are they on that page to all the way through like looking at our SDK adoption and the attach rate from our integrations, and looking at the whole story of like where they come and engage with us, whether from online through Twitter, LinkedIn, with our website, and then all the way through account sign up. And so we look at that as like a holistic point from our dashboards for developer relations, and then bring that in. And so for events, the things that have changed is it's a little bit easier because we can see the number of registrants and the attendees really easily for going to the talk. So before you had to have a guesstimate of that person, the advocate was on stage and saying like, oh, I had 50 people at my talk, I think. Now we can see very clearly, like there was 138 attendees sort of thing. So it didn't change measurement specifically, but it made it better because we had a very clear idea of like, what was being measured, and then we can pull that into the impact.
And this also allows you to iterate on content and what you're doing for DevRel activities much faster, right? Before, if you're going to an in-person event, you have a dump of, the X number of emails that attended, and then you have to try and figure out, okay, what did they actually do? Did they get any benefit from this, activity? Nowadays, you can get very narrow into, they're able to look at this piece of content, then this piece of content. And once they sell that piece of content, they want to actually, give it for a spin. And this is where, the more advocacy side is merging in with stuff like developer experience thinking about what does that first time experience look like? How long does it take for them to get started with the SDK or create their API keys and that type of stuff, which was very hard to measure before.
Yeah, and for us, we just kind of changed the weight. So each activity for DevRel has a number to it. And so we saw DevRel activities per month going down, but that just portion of their work was speaking at conferences, attending conferences, us having booths. And so we just added more weight to writing a blog post or adding a learn module or responding to an open source issue, things like that. It just took some adjustment.
I think that brings up a good point too. For measurement, it's really easy to measure the number of activities of hey, we wrote 5 blog posts, we did 10 to 5 events. But I think for advocacy and for a lot of things, it's a really more impactful message if you're measuring the impact, right? And that's a better story for you to better understand what your developer advocates are doing, and also for your executives to understand the value that your team is bringing. So saying just adjusting that weight, right? Not only just adjusting the weight, but saying, hey, we wrote a blog post, cool, but that one blog post brought 20,000 people to our website. And one event, they had 10,000 developers. And so even though those are only 2 things technically, that drove 35,000 developers or unique visitors to that content and brought that awareness to your company. And so I think if you were measuring before by numbers, this is a great time to switch it to the impact, because you can see that in a stronger manner.
Yeah, speaking of impact, what are some examples? How would you measure that? Is it page views? Is it signups? Is it? I'm sure it will vary per context, but I think showing impact is essential. How are you all thinking about demonstrating that in your contexts?
Yeah, I can take this one. So, and this is really interesting because it's dependent on the product, right? Is your product an API? Is your product maybe open source a tool or something like that? But in terms of trying to understand what is the value that someone got out of that piece of content, and they may need to take a look at a couple of different pieces of content, but eventually they want to do something after that, whether that is signing up on your website or generating an API key or testing out your platform. Now you're able to build out that full journey from initial piece of content and how many different pieces of content it took, right? Because some content, does really well in terms of top of the funnel, but then there's other piece of content that is really, really well educational and very on point. However, you have less total page views, but it's much better in terms of value that you bring into your community.
Yeah, I'd say for us, for kind of measuring that one, that's we have everything that we're measuring, and then saying we're looking at that impact and saying here's what we're driving towards the top of the funnel and the mid and the close, and that goes along with really what our company goals are, right? What does our company need most right now, and is that more top of funnel, or do we have a lot of leads coming in but they're not closing? So that means people aren't understanding our products. So we need to focus our efforts there rather than just awareness. So that for us, we have a variance of, there's a certain percentage of our time that we're spending on top of the funnel. And then there's a different percentage that we're spending on closer to the bottom of making sure people understand that. So for teams out there that are looking at what to measure, I think, and how to spend those efforts, taking a step back and seeing what's most needed for your company right now. Is it high level awareness? And are who's your competitor? What are they doing to make sure what are they doing that's hurting you that you can help with? Or is it really going back to that understanding and education?
Yeah, and with all this stuff moving towards online, it gives you a better opportunity to do that evaluation. You can take a step back and instead of just looking at the 3 talks that you did at one conference, now you can have certain content that is actually focused at top of the funnel, just getting that exposure out there. And then the other piece of content is really more around, okay, you know about this product, but what can you do with it, right? How should I leverage it?
Yeah, I think that's what analyzing and iterating is a much quicker response rate that we can do right now versus on the plane. Because if just getting on the plane, that was a lot of work. And you're oh, now I get to my expense report, now I gotta go do this, and I have to get over jet lag, and I'll come back to it. Whether right now we can look at the event and that we're doing virtually, and we can talk about here's how many people we had attended, here's our event recap, here's some of the things that we're doing, and here and because I was not on a plane, I was able to knock out some of this educational content, and I was able to actually get some deep focus time to do that demo that was lacking, or the blog post associated with it, and then I did a Twitch stream, and I can see these 3 things that I did, and I can measure the impact and what it resonated and where they jumped off in the video, or how long they spent on that blog post. I think Wistia is a great example of looking at engagement from your videos for seeing where do people rewatch, where did they stop, where did they get off.
Yeah, that's been a really nice shift, because in-person events, apart from doing a survey, you don't have data like you do, right, when you have to set up all the data points on your websites. But like, yeah, we did our digital event, and now we're like, okay, on average, each person that signed up watched a talk for 20 minutes, right? And so we have all these data points, and now we can like adjust the program based on that. Okay, so we made the day too long, it should probably be shorter, or people's attention span based on the average, they could only watch for a max 20 minutes. So kind of adjusting these programs based on what we're finding, the data, and how people are like watching or consuming content, or the experience.
So I'm wondering if we could drill down, maybe each of you could pick one tactic or technique that you've really seen be incredibly effective over the past few months. It could be something with micro events, or the fact that your team can now do more CFPs because they're not flying around. What's sort of like one big thing that you've been really excited to drill into over the past few months in terms of your goals and accomplishing them?
For us, we can actually put more investment in terms of making sure that a particular micro event has the most impact and it is helpful for our audience. And what I mean by that is we can loop other folks, such as partners, customers, that might have a little bit more of I would say, the numbers behind why it is that you're doing what you're doing. Whereas when you go to something like a in-person event, you get so busy with the planning of the booth, planning on getting there and all that type of stuff. It takes away time from maintaining those relationships. And we've noticed that we've been working with a lot of our partners much more recently because of this.
The biggest shift, and what I've loved, is so we always have product releases, product announcements at our conferences. But the really cool shift this time was we spent a bunch more time working with product and engineering and our corporate comms team, and we're able to just like enhance like those announcements, right? So we actually had to have all of the content announcements done a couple weeks prior, because we were recording the keynote a couple weeks before, and then we were able to take the keynote and create these little snippets. We were able to brief press and analysts earlier. Yeah, it actually made like our releases a lot stronger, right? Because it took a coordination across the whole company to prepare for this event. But then they had great content. They had our press wrote about us. So like that was like a massive shift versus you spend so much time preparing for that in person and that announcement's at the in person. But what about like after that?
Yeah, I think one thing that we've been drilling down even a little bit more is analyzing the data that we're looking at for how people are hearing about us and like what kind of content they're landing on, and deepening like what we're waiting for our technical documentation and guides and education points. So that's a stronger focus point that we have right now. And then going to Jana's point, we had a beta release, and we're working through a couple things for our feature workflows. And that was really strong because we had all the time to work on making sure the messaging was all correct. Ahead of time, we had, customer panels, and they were really excited about like, what is the reason, like what's the best use case? And because we had more time to prep around that, that strengthened that release, which then led to a few kind of like follow-up pieces of content that we have going through it, and some demos, and thinking through like that whole process of, okay, so we have this community aspect, and how do we support that with our code and content, and those, that trifecta for what we do, and our superpower, so to speak, for DevRel, and how do we help make our company stronger from that one? So it allows us to focus in on that.
So it seems like some of the conversation in the DevRel world earlier in the pandemic was, what are we going to do? We can't get on planes. Based on the conversation today, it seems like there are tons of advantages to a largely online DevRel program. Other than community and the in-person aspect of getting on a plane, are we missing anything? Or is there anything we're losing as a result of not being able to be on the road as much?
Yeah, I really think it's the relationships you build at like attending conferences, right? like making friends, making those connections, whether it's third party or your own. But I think I think the benefits just outweigh the negative, especially just like the reach and what we're able to develop now. It's kind of cool. We're almost thinking of like running like a HashiCorp TV show, right? Because I think people are a bit zoomed out. So it's like, hey, how do we like create more interesting content, right? How do we do like Twitch streams and do live coding? Like, and again, it's just like the reach is so much farther. So it's been a really exciting. Tough. March was really brutal, but then it's been an exciting couple months.
I think in general, I think part of the strong, like, I want to say visceral reaction, but in some ways, that one is that, and as I guess an industry in developer relations, I think we've over-indexed on associating events with developer relations. So this allows us to go back to that one. So having that, like, again, like at its core, events is part of it and it's part of the community, but it's not the only part. So it allows us to actually have deeper connections and deeper understanding of what we're doing and, you know, what we got into like developer relations to doing in the first place and what DevRel was when it really started, before we had the ability to get on the planes and do things like that. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah. And I think I'm sure we all believe this, but DevRel is becoming more important than ever, right? Sometimes you're like, oh, what does this mean? Is this a fad? But like, at least at HashiCorp, that we have a whole org dedicated to this, like this validates that this is something that like companies need. Yeah. And more than ever, right? These activities we're doing, the reach, it's important.
It's been very educational for me. So thank you all for being so candid and openly sharing all of your tips and tricks. It's been a lot of fun, and thanks to Heavybit for producing it.